Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, July 15, 2022. President Joe Biden says that he, in his meeting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, raised the issue of the murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi a few years ago. U.S. intelligence has tied the Crown Prince to that crime. President Biden said he was direct with the Crown Prince on human rights issues. Says the two also discussed energy prices. Before heading to Saudi Arabia, the president finishing up his trip to Israel, visiting a hospital in East Jerusalem that serves many Palestinians, then going to the West Bank and meeting with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. President Biden calling for a full and transparent accounting of the killing of a Palestinian-American journalist after a U.S. investigation concluded that she was shot by Israeli forces, likely unintentionally. Back in Washington, D.C., U.S. House passing abortion rights bills, the first legislative response by the majority Democrats in the House to the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade. One of the bills would put Roe v. Wade guarantees of abortion access into federal law, so it applies to everyone in all states. A second bill would ensure the ability to cross state lines to get abortions from states that restrict it to states that permit it. House today also passing a bill to reduce the cost of infant formula as shortages continue across the country. The bill would suspend import tariffs that increase the cost of formula by at least 25%. Associated Press reporting from Saudi Arabia, President Joe Biden on Friday held a carefully choreographed meeting with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the man he had once shunned for human rights abuses, as the two leaders sought to reset one of the world's most important diplomatic relationships. The encounter, which began with a fist bump as Biden stepped out of the presidential limousine, could reshape security partnerships in the Middle East and the flow of oil worldwide. Biden's 3 hours at the Royal Palace in Jeddah was seen as a diplomatic win for the Crown Prince, who has tried to rehabilitate his image, draw investments to the kingdom for his reform plans, and bolster the kingdom's security relationship with the United States. Biden seemed to approach it as a necessary, if somewhat distasteful, step to improve relations with the world's top oil exporter at a time of rising gas prices and concern about Iran's nuclear ambitions. That reporting from AP. After the meeting, back at the hotel, President Biden speaking with reporters about some of the items that came up.
We agreed to work together to deepen and extend the Yemen ceasefire. And you know there's carnage been in Yemen of late. And it's been in place more than 3 months, resulting in the most peaceful period in Yemen in 7 years. We further agreed to pursue a diplomatic process to achieve a wider settlement in Yemen. The Saudi leadership also committed to continue to facilitate the delivery of food and humanitarian goods to civilians. In this context, we discussed Saudi Arabia's security needs to defend the kingdom, given very real threats from Iran and Iran's proxies. Fourth, we concluded several new arrangements to better position our nations for the coming decades. Saudi Arabia will invest in new U.S.-led technology to develop and secure reliable 5G and 6G networks, both here and in the future in developing countries, to coordinate with the Partnership for Global Initiative, the global infrastructure and investment, which I put together at the G7. This new technology solution for 5G, called Open RAN, will outcompete other platforms, including from China. Saudi Arabia will also partner with us on a far-reaching clean energy initiative focused on green hydrogen, solar, carbon capture, nuclear, and other projects to accelerate the world's clean energy transition and to help the U.S. clean energy industry set global standards. And fifth, we had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth. And that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks. Finally, we discussed human rights and the need for political reform. As always, as I always do, I made clear that the topic is vitally important to me and to the United States. With respect to the murder of Khashoggi, I raised it at the top of the meeting, making it clear what I thought of it at the time and what I think of it now. And it was I was straightforward and direct in discussing it. I made my view crystal clear. I said very straightforwardly, For an American president to be silent on an issue of human rights, is this inconsistent with who we are and who I am? I'll always stand up for our values.
President Biden in Saudi Arabia, a news conference. At the start of that news conference opening statement, he also announced that Saudi Arabia agreeing to open its airspace to Israeli commercial flights, saying it's a positive, concrete step towards what he hopes will be normalizing relations between the country. And President Biden said he looks forward to this weekend and meeting other world leaders at the GCC+3 summit. That's the Gulf Cooperation Council, along with Egypt, Iraq, and Jordan. President Biden did take some reporters' questions, mostly on human rights and those oil prices.
What was the Crown Prince's response to your comments about Khashoggi?
He basically said that he was not personally responsible for it. I indicated I thought he was. He said he was not personally responsible for it, and he took action against those who were responsible. And then I went on to talk more about how that dealing with any opposition to or criticism of the Saudi administration in other countries was viewed as, to me, a violation of human rights. There was nothing specific.
Sir, two quick questions, if I may. First, we just heard from Jamal Khashoggi's wife, who said, after this visit, the blood of MBS's next victim is on your hands. What do you say to Mrs. Khashoggi?
I'm sorry she feels that way. I was straightforward back then. I was straightforward today. This is a meeting, I didn't come here to meet with the Crown Prince. I came here to meet with the GCC and 9 nations to deal with the security and the needs of the free world, and particularly the United States, and not leave a vacuum here, which was happening as it has in other parts of the world.
On gas prices, if I may, you said that we'll see relief at some point in the not-too-distant future. What is the message to Americans who are looking for that relief now? When should they expect to see a real change in prices, though they've already been coming down? They've already been coming down.
That's right. They've been coming down every single day, to the best of my knowledge.
When will we see the impact of this visit?
I suspect you won't see that for another couple weeks. And we'll see more when we see gas stations start to lower their price consistent with what they're paying for the oil.
Mr. President, do you regret calling the Saudis a pariah?
I don't regret anything I said.
Do you still feel that way, though, Mr. President?
I just answered your question. Do I regret it? I don't regret anything that I said. What happened to Khashoggi was outrageous.
President Biden, part of his news conference at his hotel in Saudi Arabia. About that initial fist bump that was caught on video as he met the Crown Prince, Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, Intelligence Committee Chair, tweeting, "If we ever needed a visual reminder of the continuing grip oil-rich autocrats have on U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, we got it today. One fist bump is worth 1,000 words." Daniel Shapiro is a former U.S. ambassador to Israel under President Obama, today giving his take on President Biden's trip to Saudi Arabia.
This was not an easy decision for President Biden to make this trip to Saudi Arabia. He, of course, has been very critical of the Saudi leadership, and really it predates the time of the current Saudi leadership. It predates the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, which he was rightly outraged by, and which his government, his administration released a CIA study that appointed responsibility for that murder, a terrible murder on the Saudi leadership. So for him, this was not an easy decision to make, but I think very much the right decision as he looks at what the U.S. strategic interests are. And I think this will be reflected in his remarks. He sees at a time of Russia's invasion of Ukraine the need to pull together an international coalition that resists that unwarranted aggression. Obviously, there's a strong support from NATO and other European countries, but we can't do it without other partners as well. And the Gulf partners, because of their role in energy markets, are definitely partners in this. What has gotten strained during this period of tensions in the U.S.-Saudi relationship is something that I think he's trying to reset and maybe update, which is the core bargain in the U.S.-Saudi relationship. And this is what I think he'll speak to, that the United States, as a long-term partner of Saudi Arabia, will provide assurances that it will help Saudi Arabia defend itself from the very legitimate threats it faces from Iran, from Iran's proxies in Yemen and elsewhere. And there's various ways that commitment can be expressed. And at the same time, Saudi Arabia should stand as a partner with the United States when its core strategic interests are challenged, particularly by our global rivals, Russia and China. And in the current context of the war in Ukraine, that means more oil production to bring down oil prices, not to lower the price of gas at the pump, as much as we'd all like to see that, but actually to toughen the bite of sanctions against Russia and to make more non-Russian energy sources available to European markets. I think he will touch on themes that restore and update that core Saudi-US bargain. That opens the door for some of the other issues that he will also, I'm sure, reference that are still important in the relationship, but can't all necessarily be tackled at once. Still concerns about Saudi Arabia's human rights records, not only the Khashoggi murder and the aftermath, but other human rights activists who are still in prison or still banned from traveling in Saudi Arabia. The war in Yemen, which there is a ceasefire in, but which needs to be brought to a definitive end. Trying to promote additional steps by Saudi Arabia toward normalization with Israel. And it has announced today allowing Israeli civilian overflights of Saudi air territory. So there's good progress there. But I think he will touch on what's possible in this relationship once the core of the bargain is restored. Again, this isn't necessarily an easy decision for him, but because he has been a skeptic of this relationship, I actually believe he is in many ways the right person to make the case that U.S. strategic interests require a stable U.S.-Saudi relationship, and this is a step-by-step process to get there.
Dan Shapiro was U.S. Ambassador to Israel under President Obama 2011 through 17, today at a virtual discussion on the president's Middle East trip held by the Jewish Democratic Council of America. We'll have more on President Biden's trip to the Middle East and his remarks in Israel before he went to Saudi Arabia later in Washington today. Now back to Washington and abortion policy. Washington Post previewing today's U.S. House debate, writing, "The House on Friday is poised to vote on legislation that would protect access to reproductive health care, including the ability to travel across state lines for an abortion, as part of Democrats' efforts to minimize the consequences of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade last month. One bill, the Women's Health Protection Act, would enshrine the protections of Roe v. Wade into law. The House already passed the bill last year, but it failed to advance in the Senate. Another bill, the Ensuring Women's Right to Reproductive Freedom Act, would reaffirm the right for someone seeking an abortion to travel freely across state lines." That was from the Washington Post. The first bill debated today was the one to put Roe v. Wade protections on abortion into law. The sponsor, Congresswoman Judy Chu, Democrat from California.
I rise today in strong support of my bill, the Women's Health Protection Act, or WIPA. WIPA is the bill that will protect the right to access abortion after the tragic fall of Roe versus Wade. It ensures in federal law the right to abortion care for every woman in every state and ensures states may not erode that right. You will hear Republicans say our bill goes too far, but that's simply not true. Our bill preserves the protections of Roe that we've lived with for 50 years, affirmed through decades of subsequent court decisions. WIPA prohibits the bans and restrictions that violate the spirit of Roe, from outright bans to laws forcing women to undergo invasive ultrasounds, unnecessary waiting periods, or forcing doctors to give patients medically inaccurate information. You will hear Republicans repeat over and over again that Democrats are voting for abortion up until the moment of birth. Actually, for 50 years, the court had the provision of an exception for late-term abortion in Roe to preserve the life or health of the mother. It's because they valued the life of the mother. Do Republicans actually believe the mother's life is expendable? Apparently so. What you will not hear is Republicans say that the vast majority of Americans do not want Roe to be overturned. You will not hear an apology to the 10-year-old who was raped and had to travel to Indiana for an abortion because it was prohibited in her home state. You will not hear an acknowledgement that women are capable for deciding for themselves whether to terminate a pregnancy. This bill respects our right to make our own decisions about our bodies. It's time to put control of our bodies back in our hands. Now is the time to pass the Women's Health Protection Act.
Congresswoman Judy Chu, Democrat from California, on the House floor, opposing this bill to legalize abortion nationwide, enshrine the Roe v. Wade protections into law. Congresswoman Kat Cammack, Republican from Florida.
I rise today to fight for life and in strong opposition to H.R. 8296, the Abortion on Demand Until Birth Act. You know, I never thought that I would have to stand here on the House floor and debate the fact that killing someone for their gender, their sex, their race, but here we are. We're debating a bill that is being pushed by my colleagues on the other side that would legalize abortions based on a baby's sex, race, or potential disability. Yeah, I'm going to say that again because I think that is perhaps the most outrageous, horrific, regressive, sexist, and racist part of this legislation. This bill allows for abortions up until the day of natural delivery because the child maybe isn't the right sex or the right race according to the mother, who is a woman, by the way. And we need to stop this lie that suddenly abortion is health care. It is not. And I have heard repeatedly my colleagues talk about this 10-year-old girl who was brutally raped. This is a heartbreaking situation, yet not a single peep about the man who did this, an illegal who crossed our border, who never should have been in our country in the first place, who committed this crime. Not one peep. In our country, we are based really, quite frankly, on a simple notion that we are of equal opportunity, not equal outcome. Abortion, that is equal outcome. We know the outcome. So all I am asking today is that my colleagues think a little bit critically about what they're doing and what they're saying, the message that they are sending, that they believe in equal outcome, not opportunity, because they are, quite frankly, denying the right for every single one of these children the opportunity to live.
Congresswoman Kat Cammack, Republican from Florida, debating on the House floor. The House passed this bill by a vote of 219 to 210. It was almost entirely party line. All the no votes coming from Republicans and one Democrat, Henry Cuellar of Texas. The second abortion rights bill debated and voted on today in the House would guarantee the right of those seeking abortion to travel from states that restrict it to states that permit it. The sponsor of that bill, Democrat Lizzie Fletcher of Texas.
In my beloved home state of Texas, we are in a crisis, a healthcare crisis, a humanitarian crisis. Since last September, access to abortion has been severely limited, and since last month, it has been eliminated. In response, Texans who can do so have been traveling out of state to obtain abortion care, first to Oklahoma and Louisiana and New Mexico. And as some of these states have banned abortion, they are now traveling even further. And now, in response to this exercise of their constitutional right to travel between the states, lawmakers in Texas and in other states across the country are threatening to take away that right too. This is not hypothetical, and it is not hyperbole, and it is nothing like what we just heard from the minority in response to this bill. Just last week, a group of lawmakers in Texas publicized a letter that they sent to at least one law firm in Texas, threatening the firm and each of its partners with felony criminal prosecution and disbarment because of the firm's policy to reimburse employees for travel costs associated with out-of-state travel for abortion care. And it's not just Texas. Lawmakers in Missouri have already considered legislation to prohibit its residents from traveling outside the state for abortion care to states where it's legal. And groups are working on model legislation to introduce in states across the country as we speak. Not only do these threats fail to reflect the will of the majority of people in this country who favor a legislative framework that takes into account the complex circumstances of pregnancy that we have discussed this morning, these threats fail to reflect the fundamental rights guaranteed in our Constitution. Congress has the authority and the responsibility to protect people from these unconstitutional efforts to prevent, restrict, impede, or otherwise punish a person traveling to another state to obtain a legal abortion and to protect those providers and others who are helping them. This morning, we're doing exactly that in passing the Ensuring Women's Right to Reproductive Freedom Act. I thank the chairman, the speaker, my original co-sponsors, Representative Strickland and Representative Raskin, and all of our co-sponsors for once again responding with urgency to the cruel efforts to deprive my fellow Texans and our fellow Americans of their constitutional right to travel by bringing this bill to the floor today. And I urge everyone in this body to vote yes.
Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher, Democrat from Texas, on the House floor. Rising in opposition to the bill, Republican Kathy McMorris Rodgers of Washington State.
It is already unconstitutional to prevent a woman from traveling between states. The pro-life movement does not support and has always rejected criminalizing and punishing women, period. State laws currently in effect have exceptions to save the life of the mother. And pro-life laws do not prevent women from getting care they need in cases of miscarriages and ectopic pregnancies. Regarding this legislation, the Ensuring Access to Abortion Act, I have many questions and concerns. Its vague language, designed to promote more abortions, undermines parent consent for minors, opens loopholes for abuse, and eliminates medical supervision for chemical abortions. This bill does nothing to explicitly prevent an unrelated adult or a sexual abuser from taking a minor out of state for an abortion without parent consent. It would prevent healthcare professionals, social workers, and schools in every state from reporting instances of child abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect because they could be seen as delaying or hindering access to abortion. It also undermines parent rights. Parents can be targeted by the federal government and sued for wanting to help their child just by asking them to delay traveling to get an abortion. If their child is 16, for example, the parents lose power to protect their teenager from being coerced by an older man to get an abortion. The Ensuring Access to Abortion Act undermines the health and safety of women. By preempting state laws regulating the practice of medicine, it overrides the majority of states that have determined it is safest for doctors to prescribe pills for chemical abortions. This puts women and minors in danger if they experience complications. Finally, these same provisions give sexual abusers and human traffickers more direct access to chemical abortions in all 50 states. It ensures that doctors in states like California, where there's no parent consent, can effectively become pill mills by prescribing and mailing abortion drugs to children and minors and end lives all over the country. This is extreme. Again, I ask my colleagues to abandon this agenda for unlimited abortions with no restrictions. It only promotes more fear, pain, and dehumanization of the most vulnerable, the helpless among us.
Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rodgers, Republican from Washington State, on the House floor. This bill passed the House by a vote of 223 to 205. Again, it was mostly or overwhelmingly party line. Democrats yes, Republicans no. 3 Republicans did vote yes: Adam Kinzinger of Illinois, Fred Upton from Michigan, Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania. This bill, like the previous bill that was mentioned and that would codify Roe v. Wade, now passing the House, heading over to the Senate, but versions of both bills have already been blocked by Senate Republicans. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 658, NASDAQ up 201, S&P up 72. CNBC reporting it this way: stocks rallied on Friday in response to a new round of bank earnings and promising economic data as fears of a 100 basis point rate hike from the Federal Reserve to subdue rising inflation subsided. Wall Street Journal has a story: U.S. stores are still struggling to stock baby formula despite months-long efforts by manufacturers and the Biden administration to boost supplies. Availability of powdered formula products in U.S. stores earlier this month dropped to the lowest levels so far this year, with about 30% of products out of stock for the week ending July 3rd, according to the market research firm IRI. Back to the House floor, passing a bill today to try to increase infant formula supply by waiving some import tariffs. It was introduced by Congresswoman Susan DelBene, Democrat from Washington State.
Around the country, 74% of formula shelves are empty. And in my home state of Washington, we are one of 10 states where over 90% of shelves are empty. Severely stretched supply chains and a major formula plant going offline have left shelves barren. Unreliable formula supply is a critical problem for families. Parents are driving hours to multiple different stores just to find any formula. And that's time that parents don't have. Changing formulas constantly is also disruptive to babies. It can cause digestive problems and excessive crying. In fact, Jessie, a mom in my district, has been struggling to find formula for her infant daughter, Amara. She is not one to ask for help, but when she was running low on her last can, Jessie joined a local social media group where other parents would post when they saw formula on shelves. And she downloaded an app that would notify her when more cans were available. Jessie was able to find formula, but she realizes that she is one of the lucky parents who had the means, the time, and the network to support Amara. By removing tariffs on foreign formula that meets FDA's safety standards, the Formula Act will make it easier and more affordable for parents to feed their babies so fewer are finding themselves in this difficult situation. This is a common sense solution, so let's make it happen. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
Congresswoman Susan DelBene, Democrat from Washington State, on the House floor. Republican Congressman Greg Murphy of North Carolina supporting this legislation as well, but in his remarks, blaming the Biden administration for causing the problem in the first place.
With families facing record-high inflation, with record-high food and gas prices, the last thing that parents need to worry about is able to find formula, much less even being able then to afford it. H.R. 8351 ensures that families are not covering the cost of additional taxes on formula imported into the United States, and I'm pleased with the relief that this bill will provide. But unfortunately, as has been the mantra of this administration, this crisis exemplifies just another self-inflicted wound that has been the point of this Biden administration. The administration knew about the impending shortage and failed to act to avert the crisis. The incompetence of this administration then has real-world effects. We are talking about something that is basic sustenance for infants in this country. They need this, and this bill will help bring affordability to parents for their children.
Congressman Greg Murphy, Republican from North Carolina, on the House floor. The House passed this bill by a vote of 421 to 2. The 2 noes, both Republicans, Louis Gohmert of Texas, Rick Allen from Georgia. The bill sponsors say that tariffs on baby formula imported from countries without a free trade agreement with the U.S. increases the cost of the formula by an average 27%. Also today, President Joe Biden endorsing a healthcare-only budget reconciliation package before the August recess. This after Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, said that he will not support any tax or climate provisions in a bill before they go on the August recess. He says that he wants to wait till later in the year to consider that to see what the inflation numbers are. The president says that he plans to address climate through executive action. So what is the president endorsing, and likely that the House and Senate will bring up, deals with curbing prescription drug prices, extending subsidies for people buying health insurance through the Affordable Care Act, and perhaps reducing the deficit. On what Senator Joe Manchin has reportedly told Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, this from Senator Martin Heinrich, Democrat from New Mexico. He tweets, "We have an opportunity to address the climate crisis right now. Senator Manchin's refusal to act is infuriating. It makes me question why he is chair of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee." Washington Today continues in a moment.
Listening to programs on C-SPAN through C-SPAN Radio just got easier. Tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio, and listen to Washington Journal daily at 7 a.m. Eastern, important congressional hearings and other public affairs events throughout the day, and weekdays at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern. Catch Washington Today for a fast-paced report on the stories of the day. Listen to C-SPAN anytime. Just tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. Fox News reporting from Israel, President Biden reaffirmed his commitment to a two-state solution for Israelis and Palestinians and announced plans to bolster U.S. financial aid to the Palestinian people, reversing multiple policies implemented by former President Trump. After spending time with Israeli leaders in Jerusalem, Biden met with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas and other top Palestinian officials before visiting the Church of the Nativity, the place Christians cite as the birthplace of Jesus. That from Fox News. One of President Biden's stops today, Augusta Victoria Hospital in East Jerusalem.
These hospitals are the backbone of the Palestinian healthcare system. People turn to you in their moment of need, as you well know, with their children who are sick, with a loved one who's injured. When they get that cancer diagnosis, the most feared word, I think, in all languages is when the doctor looks at you and says, it's cancer. They don't know what to do. You not only care for them, you guide them. It's the same people all over the world. In that moment, all that matters is you have someone that you can turn to and radiates hope and help. That's why the United States, through the Agency for International Development, has been proud to support this network of hospitals with $85 million since 2014. It's part of our commitment to support health and dignity to the Palestinian people. Maybe the most overused word in the English language for the Irish is dignity. My dad used to say, everyone, no matter what their circumstance, is entitled to be treated with dignity. Dignity. And dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic took a hard toll here, as it did in so many communities around the world. So today, I'm pleased to announce the United States is committing an additional $100 million to support these hospitals, your staffs, and that work for the Palestinian people.
President Biden at a hospital in East Jerusalem, one that treats many Palestinians. From there, he went to the West Bank for a meeting with the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas at the presidential compound in Bethlehem, the two making statements to reporters. First, President Abbas saying now is the time for the recognition of an independent country of Palestine.
After 74 years of the Nakba, displacement and occupation, isn't it not the time for this occupation to end and for our steadfast people again to gain their freedom and independence, and for the hopes of our young men and women whom we cherish and trust their creativity to achieve a promising future without occupation. In this regard, we say that the key to peace and security in our region begins with recognizing the State of Palestine and enabling the Palestinian people to obtain their legitimate rights in accordance with international legitimacy resolutions, and ending all the permanent status issues, including the Palestinian refugees issue. And the way to that begins with ending the Israeli occupation of our land, the land of State of Palestine, with East Jerusalem as its capital on the 1967 borders.
Through an interpreter, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas standing beside President Biden in Bethlehem in the West Bank. President Biden saying that he supports what is called the two-state solution, separate countries for Israel and Palestine, but he said that now may not be the time to restart negotiations. Also, in his remarks, President Biden speaking about the killing of a Palestinian-American journalist, Shireen Abu Akleh.
The Palestinian people deserve a state of their own that's independent, sovereign, viable, and contiguous. 2 states for 2 peoples, both of whom have deep and ancient roots in this land, living side by side in peace and security. Both states fully respecting equal rights of the other citizens. Both peoples enjoying equal measure of freedom and dignity. That's what this is fundamentally all about. Every person has a right to be treated with dignity. It's simply basic. I know that the goal of the 2 states seems so far away, while indignities like restrictions on movement and travel or the daily worry of your children's safety are real and they are immediate. The Palestinian people are hurting now. You feel it, you can just feel it. Your grief and frustration. In the United States, we can feel it. But we've never give up on the work of peace. You know, there must be a political horizon that the Palestinian people can actually see or at least feel. We cannot allow the hopelessness to steal away the future that so many have worked toward for so long. So even if the ground is not ripe at this moment to restart negotiations, the United States and my administration will not give up on trying to bring the Palestinians and Israelis and both sides closer together. I do believe that in this moment, when Israel is improving relations with its neighbors throughout the region, we can harness that same momentum to reinvigorate the peace process between the Palestinian people and the Israelis. I recognize how hard all these challenges must be and will be to work through. Above all, there must be an end to the violence that has devastated too many families. It's heart-wrenching that so many Palestinians and Israelis have lost their lives just this year. And the United States has suffered loss as well, including the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. And she was an American citizen and a proud Palestinian. And she was performing very vital work in an independent media and vital work of democracy. Her death is enormous loss to the essential work of sharing with the world the story of the Palestinian people. I hope that her legacy will inspire more young people to carry on her work of reporting the truth and telling stories that are too often overlooked. The United States will continue to insist on a full and transparent accounting of her death and will continue to stand up for media freedom everywhere in the world.
President Biden in Bethlehem, standing beside the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. A reference to the killing in May of Al Jazeera journalist, Palestinian-American Shireen Abu Akleh. In the audience today of reporters, a chair was left empty except for a poster of her with the text, Shireen Abu Akleh, the voice of Palestine. A U.S. investigation found that she was likely killed by unintentional Israeli fire back in May. Her family sent a letter to President Biden protesting the findings and asking to meet with the president while he was in the Middle East. White House says that Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke with the family of Abu Akleh this week and invited them for a meeting in Washington. Martin Indyk is a former U.S. ambassador to Israel, served under President Bill Clinton. Today he took part in a panel discussion about the president's trip to the Middle East and was asked, what are your takeaways of his visit to Israel?
First of all, the way in which Joe Biden comes across as so human a president, much like Bill Clinton did on his visits to Israel. They announced beforehand, in typical fashion, the staff announces that there'll be no handshakes. And then, of course, the president goes and breaks that rule as soon as he gets off the plane, doing it with Bibi Netanyahu, which was a kind of interesting development. But the way in which he, at Yad Vashem, leant down to talk to these elderly Holocaust survivors, I think touched every Israeli, even the most cynical Israeli journalist, was overwhelmed by the human gesture that Joe Biden made, and it resonated with Israelis for a reason that maybe some of you will remember, is that when King Hussein came to Israel after a particularly egregious attack that had taken place by a rogue Jordanian soldier, had killed some Israeli civilians, and he came to the shiva of the families that were mourning and got down on his knees to talk to them. And so I think that resonance was really important in terms of getting Israelis to feel that they had a real friend in Joe Biden. And I think Dan would agree that the Israelis have a bottomless desire to be loved by American presidents. It doesn't matter how much else you do for them. It's the love that they want to feel, and I think they felt it very clearly from President Biden. And that's universally, if you just see the press coverage in Israel, universally positive in that regard. There was an interesting, what appeared to be a divergence that the press played up between President Biden and Prime Minister Lapid over the issue of Iran, where President Biden, in his remarks, emphasized diplomacy is the best way to try to deal with Iran's nuclear threat, whereas Prime Minister Lapid talked about the need, Israel's belief that there was a need for, in the ultimate judgment, if everything else doesn't work, to use force. What wasn't pointed to there in their press announcement was very clear in the declaration that the two leaders signed, was that the United States committed itself, and I may be paraphrasing here rather than getting the exact wording, but it committed itself to using all means of national power necessary to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. In other words, President Biden did something that Israel has been urging the United States to do for a long time, which is to put the option of force on the table. And that was very clear in the declaration. I think that was a takeaway that I thought was very important.
Martin Indyk was U.S. Ambassador to Israel under President Bill Clinton. He's now a distinguished fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, part of a virtual panel discussion on the president's Middle East trip hosted by the Jewish Democratic Council of America. Martin Indyk referring to Dan. Another panelist was Dan Shapiro, who was U.S. Ambassador to Israel under President Obama. And the third panelist was Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Democrat from Florida. You can find this discussion in its entirety at our video library at cspan.org. And thanks for listening to Washington Today. Get more top Washington stories sent to you every day by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word. You can sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.